All right, everybody. Welcome to the Beef and Bitcoin podcast. This is episode 7 with your hosts, Brett and CH. Today's topic is going to be dissecting the Time Magazine article entitled Bitcoin Matters for Freedom. And the reason we wanted to do an episode on this is, one, because I think it'll lead to a bunch of topics that we can kind of jump down. But two, is that it's one of the first pieces of mainstream media articles on Bitcoin that wasn't that bad. It was pretty accurate and paints a much more realistic picture of how Bitcoin works in the wild, and not another article about Bitcoin only being used for drug dealers or money laundering or whatever other bullshit excuse that people can come up with to say why Bitcoin is such a bad thing. But so we wanted to focus on this one. But first and foremost, man, how you doing?
Doing good. I'm going to go right off what you just said there. The whole money laundering thing, I always think is funny. Like Shapeshift, which is co-founded by Eric Voorhees, he recently tweeted about that. The whole thing with Shapeshift getting looked into for money laundering, and he's talking about, we do like 9 million, nothing. And, for instance, HSBC was laundering money for multiple drug cartels, and they're laundering tens of billions of dollars, if not more. And it's just funny how crypto's a drop in the bucket. Whatever, if there is money laundering, which there probably is, I'm not going to say there isn't, but it's pretty stupid because Bitcoin is tracked, so it doesn't make sense to launder money through Bitcoin. It just goes to show the real money laundering system is our current banking system. It's easy, and when they talk about like HSBC, where I think it was the guy who was the whistleblower, literally got screwed as per usual. He was a whistleblower and couldn't get hired anywhere else. Obviously was fired, even though he did the right thing. And it goes to show you the banking system is a great way to launder money. They can hide it, they can create new money, and it clearly is it's the reason Bitcoin exists right now, because of what happened in 2008, where they obviously lied and didn't care about people's money, and you saw the outcome. You saw the collapse of a housing market, and obviously the whole mortgage system was a joke. Mortgage-backed securities were wrecked. But just to go into the article here, it just talks about basically the refugees and how the currency, after probably in the last decade, if not a little bit less, maybe the last 5-6 years, it's up a million percent in terms of inflation. It's absolutely insane. Their paper might as well be used as tinder for a fire. And one of the interesting things is more than 3 million Venezuelans have fled since 2014. And in 2017, Venezuela's population was 31.98 million. So literally, think about just 10% of their country leaving. For instance, in the U.S., we're over 330 million. So let's say 33 million people in the U.S. leave. That's a big deal. I mean, that's a lot of people. That's, some of the states in the U.S. are only 1 million people. So that's a big deal. And another thing they also talked about, and another thing mentioned, is wire transfer from USD to Bolivar right now has a fee up to 56%, which is absolutely insane. So if someone were to send $100, their fee would be $56, which is basically highway robbery. And this is what happens when you have a system that people are basically forced into. You have no other option if you want to send money. Now that's what, obviously, Bitcoin changes that completely and reverts that in its head.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable that many people have left Venezuela. And when we live in the United States, where I'm very lucky to live here, but it's hard to think, when do you make that decision to say, I'm going to pick up and leave this country because things aren't going well. And every time I've ever looked into that, the money has always been one of the main reasons people get up and leave. I mean, when you live in a country where the money stops working, where you've experienced 1,000,000% inflation, what are you going to do from there? Like, you have to leave. Money is so important to survive in society. It touches every aspect of your life. And when I've never experienced a time when my money stopped working. Sure, I've experienced inflation. Movie tickets used to cost $5 when I was a kid, and now it's 12, 15. And we don't even question that. But I've never had my entire life savings in the bank just become completely worthless. That blows my mind that that's even possible. So when you understand that that could happen anywhere, I don't blame anybody for picking up all their shit and getting out of Venezuela as quickly as possible.
Exactly. And that perfect statement you said was the movie tickets. And you're 30 years old roughly. So from when you were a kid, it went from $5 to 12 to 15. That's an increase of 100% to 150%. And that's absolutely bonkers. And that is where we are at nowadays. Is the inflation is happening everywhere and it's creeping in, um, and no one talks about it. No one talks about price difference in cars, college tuition. They kind of just push it off to the side. And the reason is because they just don't understand monetary history. It's as simple as that. It's normal. They've told inflation's normal. They're told that the whole system will collapse without inflation. I mean, and so we're basically putting ourselves into that position because we're on the verge of a systemic collapse.
It's funny. I want to touch on the inflation for one more second. Somebody had a tweet the other day and they mentioned that the things that have experienced the most inflation have been touched or subsidized by government the most. So that could be education
Exactly.
and housing. And the way they back that up is they said they put up a clip from Home Alone when they're ordering 10 pizzas or whatever, and in that humongous house in Chicago. And that movie, I think it came out in 1990, but it was $12 a pizza back then in 1990. And you can see that, $12 a pizza for a large pizza, that might be close to the national average, like still today, 20 years later. Uh, but the cost of college has gone up probably, I don't know, in the hundreds of percent in that same period of time. So, like, why would the cost of a large pizza pie be tracked pretty close to what it is today than the cost of getting an education? I can't explain that.
Exactly. There's a great comparison I might have mentioned on previous episodes. In the last 20 years, basically 1997 to 2017, the cost of education has more than doubled. And that includes like room and board and whatever, more than doubled. And TVs have dropped 96% in value. Free money being thrown into a system, aka free money for college, aka they lend no matter what. They don't do a review of person, don't ask what they're doing for 4 years in college. They're just, here's $100,000 and you're going to have to pay interest for probably a very long time, but they don't really think that through. They just tell them, get the education, that's all you need, education, education. If you don't get a college degree, how can you succeed in life? And that is what you were repeatedly told. And I think the situation would be similar for you, CH. It is a system. It is a system that is feeding itself, and it's just a giant bubble. I mean, think about it. This has been developing for 40 years now. Um, college with this being this broad and this many people doing higher education has never really before been a thing. And you look at the last, it's 60, 70 years. So for the most part, people are alive. It's normal. But you go before that, it's not, more than that. It really wasn't as normal. Not everyone went to college. It was just a normal thing because it wasn't seen as, you didn't need a degree to go get a job and get you know, a job that paid and, covered every family's bill. And now you see, there's parents who, you know, you know, husband and wife who work all the time, just to make ends meet. And that's the difference in the world we live in today. And why does that happen? Because inflation of the currency supply, money supply. Um, Currency actually is the correct term because the dollar is not money, it is currency.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy. I went to a private college. I want to say it was like $35,000 a year. I had a full scholarship, so it wasn't I didn't worry about it all that much. But
Yeah,
that's I can't. It's hard. I don't know that I would encourage someone to take out a loan for 100 plus thousand dollars to go not learn anything for 4 years. It's I don't know. Just seems weird to me now.
yeah. And to tell you the state of college where it's at is, obviously the majority of the kids go for the social experience. So there's that. And then I think we've just been fed, the narrative's been fed to people that you need a degree to do this, and now you're seeing more and more corporations opening up to people who didn't go to college, because they're realizing a lot of these kids they're getting that come out of college aren't ready for the world. They aren't ready for the workforce. Um, and it's sad. And I think, here again, there's that Harvard study I've mentioned before. Um, they predict, the next decade, 50% of colleges will be, out of business.
I wanted to tie, going to college and whether or not that's a good or a bad idea back into Bitcoin and why, Bitcoin matters for freedom. You just
Hmm.
need to really learn a skill. And we've mentioned this on a prior podcast. I mean, that's the most important thing you can do. And it doesn't have to cost you $150,000 to go learn a skill that you could make a significant amount of money doing.
A, a,
And a lot of the developers that I follow on Twitter who, they're working on particular projects or, they're working remotely, they can be paid in this money in Bitcoin and nothing can stop that. And the only reason that they're paid in Bitcoin is because it's such a hard money, but the skill and the service that they provide is just so valuable that someone's willing to spend their Bitcoin to pay for that service. And I think you're going to start to see all of the malinvestment start to unwind, where you're only going to be willing to, that we can talk about time preference. So everybody's got a lower time preference now that they know that Bitcoin exists and they don't want to, spend their money on stupid shit. But the most valuable services are, you're only going to accept Bitcoin. Like, that's the only way to do it. Does that make sense?
yeah, no, and I understand what you're going with that. We live in a time where there's so much consumerism. We spend money on so many things we don't need or don't use, and we see it everywhere with excess. And I'm not against buying things. I enjoy things. Obviously, I'm not, you know, but it's to a point where it's devastating, to the society we live in, where we run off credit, credit cards and debt, and people aren't, all they're thinking about is how to spend their money instead of invest it and grow it for themselves, and so they're not stuck in this, rat race of this living paycheck to paycheck. It's insane how many Americans live paycheck to paycheck, even as you go higher up in class. And the reason is each, they all try to keep up with a certain part of society. They need to have the SUV, they need to have this, belong to this club, etc. Thinking about the long term and what they could really do with that money in the long term and compounding gains, and then freeing yourself. I think the biggest reason for I think any of us accruing wealth is just it's freedom. It's simple as that.
I've never felt more free walking to the Bitcoin ATM and putting fiat in and getting Bitcoin in return and it showing up in my hardware wallet. You feel pretty fucking free. It feels fantastic. It might sound crazy, but it's it's an awesome experience.
So going back to the Time magazine article, uh, not magazine but Time article, we are looking at, I highlighted this there and it's probably been on your screen now for a while, but anyways, I'll read it. Because they live under authoritarianism, Venezuelans have no way to reform the policies that have destroyed their economy. They can't hold their rulers accountable through free and fair elections or campaign for change without fear of reprisal. As they stand in hours long lines for ration groceries and medicine and watch their life savings disappear, it can seem like there are no options. And a great point of that is Venezuelans have no way to reform the policies that have destroyed their economy. And that's the perfect line. Why do they have no way? One, their government has taken away their firearms, so any chance to defend themselves. It doesn't matter how much, self-defense you know or how good of a Muay Thai or Jiu-Jitsu practitioner you are. It doesn't matter because the government has the guns. That's as simple as that. Um, and so you see that they can force their policies and their will over the people, and you've seen Maduro do that for years now there, and it's hilarious. A decade ago, you had, especially in America, you had a bunch of Democrats, praising, Venezuela for, how great socialism is, and you see how this happens. It's a rinse and repeat cycle. You see it throughout the 20th century. You see with the Soviet bloc, You see it right here in front of you, and you see it in many other countries where there is just so much control of the people, and there it's just here again, people trading freedom for safety.
Yeah, and we really have to stop doing that. I mean, I don't know how much individual freedoms that I've given up that didn't really cross my mind at the time. Giving up my privacy or having social media track my information, having Google track every step that I take, where I go, my calendar, and save it into a into a database and keep all that information permanently that could be later used against me. I mean, I'm not trying to sound paranoid, but it's a slippery fucking slope when shit hits the fan.
Yeah.
You got to be. I think now because of Bitcoin, I've never taken my privacy more seriously. That's why I use an alias. It's cheap security. I can go by CH, and that might stop. I don't know, 80% of the people who are like, let me see if I can hack into this guy's phone or whatever. But I don't want to take the time to looking up his actual identity because he's been using a pseudonym. It's just cheap security. And we got to start taking our privacy a lot more seriously in
Yeah.
the future.
Yeah, I'm out here. So yeah, that's me. I'm public.
Yeah, I mean it's hard because you have a lot of Bitcoin advocates talking about that, saying that they're being hypocritical, that they're using their real names, and anybody can find them. But we should give thanks to them that they've doxed themselves and they are trying to give you the best advice that they possibly can, because they don't want to see you get your phone ported or have your wallets drained without you even realizing it, or having your private key stolen in a long range attack or something like that. They want you to be safe and learn from this, and hopefully wake you up to the fact that you're giving away all of your privacy all the time, like willingly.
I agree 100% with the fact of the privacy part where you're giving up at all times. Everything's tracking you. Whether if you're using Uber, they're always tracking you. You have to have your location services on. And as you said with the pseudonym, like one of the things I wish, pseudonym for crypto Twitter. Crypto Twitter is a fun place. Not that I don't usually say what I want, but it'd be a lot more fun as a pseudonym. I think, you could voice more things without having the backlash.
Right. I mean, that's the point. Like, you're self-censoring, like, on purpose
Yeah.
because it's tied to you. Like, that's so fucked up. Like, when you really think about it, it sucks that you need to self-censor, and it doesn't mean not playing nice with everybody, or
I wouldn't say I'm
not being
perfect,
a
but
yeah, or not being a jerk or anything. But like the fact that you are self-censoring even in the slightest means that your kind of freedoms have already been infringed upon. And I love the fact that I know with Bitcoin on the money side of things, nobody's going to infringe on that at all, because no one's stopping my payment from going through or that transaction being confirmed, period. Like, it's not going to get censored. But you can certainly be censored on PayPal, your bank account, Patreon, everything. They can just totally shut you down. So you're starting to see freedom coming from all sides, right? You have the money side, you have free speech, you have people being deplatformed, you have people being taken off of YouTube or videos being blocked and taken down. I mean, it's crazy.
yeah, the whole censorship thing is getting insane now, and we're seeing it, and people aren't questioning it. And why people aren't questioning it? Because um, it's slowly pervaded into your life. It's not like that. It's not the snap of our fingers. You go from a free place to a very controlled society. It happens over time, and that's exactly what's happening here. And we see it, and people aren't. It just slowly pervades in. And a great example was when I had an internship where I was a sales engineer, and one of the people mentioned about like autonomous cars. The car makers knew they couldn't get people to go to autonomous cars right away, but if they slowly implemented features in cars like blind spot monitoring, sensors, etc. over time, people would get more accustomed to it. Lane shift prevention, etc. Alerts, that's exactly what's happening right now, and that's every new generation you're seeing more little features added, and so that's what's happening with that's how we're going to get to autonomous cars.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. This stuff does take a lot longer than you think.
Yeah.
And the autonomous vehicles is a perfect example. I'm a car guy. I love cars, and I thought 5 years ago, I probably thought autonomous vehicles would have been here by now, like fully deployed, and that's definitely not the case. I was completely wrong about that, and it does take time for these generational shifts, and as you can see it in this country right now, it's going to take a long time before people realize, like, whoops, we've been giving up our privacy for the last couple of decades here, and we're very much immune to that happening. We're just going along with the show and not really questioning too much, which is a shame.
Oh yeah. No, it's I there again another statement I agree with. We go along with the show. People don't question the narrative. They keep their mouths shut and they just it's not my problem. Basically, is what they try to say. But it is your problem. It's everyone's problem. Um, and I saw a pretty interesting tweet from Zero Hedge earlier about China basically preparing for war, and it's another thought. We again here have no clue what the future beholds, and the whole autonomous car thing might not happen if there is a global economy that gets wrecked. It just might not become practical. You know what I mean? And obviously that'd be like a worst case scenario, but
Yeah.
that'd be like where you have currency crisis, etc., where people just lose faith in the system, and which is obviously one of the disaster scenario. And who knows how this plays out. But so that's also a thought. And I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news or the speculator, but that's definitely something that came thought, food for thought.
Yeah, to tie into that a little bit more with the Times article, um, they mentioned a lot of talk about this cashless society that we're kind of moving towards, especially in China and Sweden. And cashless sounds great in theory, but it's definitely not. It's definitely not.
No, it's
Um,
it's the worst thing you
you
can have.
exactly, and in no way do you want every single payment that you make tracked, monitored, and potentially censored. And when you have people like Tim Cook standing up here saying, like, we need to get to a cashless society as quickly as possible, I don't get that. That doesn't make sense to me. Um, it's funny because a couple of years ago there was one of my friends. He always had cash on him. Always, he exclusively used cash, and I thought it was the dumbest thing ever. It's like, why would you be carrying around a wad of $200 on you at all times? It just didn't make any sense. And now I think back, I'm like, huh, that's pretty interesting. I still don't know if I would carry around a wad of cash for all of my transactions, but I give someone a lot of credit who would. And it's funny because this guy was probably the straightest person I've ever met, never committed a crime in his life, and they still used cash. I don't know. It's interesting, but when you see such a push from um, I don't know, CEOs and world leaders about going cashless and how it's such a good thing, it's
It's not.
you really got to question that. And if people don't know enough to question it, that's where it gets a little scary, because overall I'm not that concerned, but when you have a really large group of people who don't understand why that's a bad thing, and their only argument is, well, if you have nothing to hide, why would it matter? That's like the worst excuse you can give, because that's you, like, being completely brainwashed and saying, yeah, take all of my freedom, I don't give a shit, I have nothing to hide. And whether you have anything to hide or not isn't the point, because it's a slippery slope once you start getting censored.
Yeah, no, people don't understand how easy it is to get censored or get in trouble when you live in a society where everything is controlled, everything's monitored, and that's where the cashless society is scary. Every transaction, they know what you're buying. It's just not. That's not healthy. It's not good, and it's one of those things that worries me. It's not something to be taken lightly. We've seen it taken away many times, and all it takes is one bad incident, And as we've mentioned before in previous episodes, dictators and regimes come out of terrible times, economic hardship. When people have nowhere to turn, that's where you get it, and that's what always worries me, because that's when people lose hope. When people lose hope, you have bad societies, basically. Bad time to be alive, basically. Um,
Yeah, I wonder if, not to get too be a downer on this, but I don't feel like it's bad yet in the United States, at least for me personally. When I look around,
no.
I don't see anybody too concerned. I see people employed, but with a caveat that they may very well be employed at a place that's malinvestment that won't be around anymore shortly. Um, I don't know. I wonder how that plays out. That's why the future is going to be pretty tight because I'm curious to see how it goes. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see how this is going to all play out now. Um, yeah, I would not like to see the U.S. go to cashless society. I think it's stupid that businesses force people not to use cash because cash is legal tender, and I think those businesses, that should be a ruling that those businesses, I think they're like in New York and San Francisco, Seattle, where tech is everything. Uh, they should not force customers not to be able to pay with cash because that's your only way. Maybe even if you're using Bitcoin, Bitcoin is still pseudo anonymous, but it's your only way to pay without anyone knowing. And that's why I'm such a big proponent of cash. I love cash. I think it's one of those things. And even with Bitcoin, it's another thing we've discussed in previous episodes. It's really interesting. What do you do? Obviously you can use Bitcoin without the internet, but still, what do you do without power? That's the biggest question. What do you do without power? And so, do you still have cash in the society? Um, does how do you do that? Do you put Bitcoin on pieces of paper with um, what is it, QR codes? I mean, who knows? It's
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to see how that plays
I guess a
out.
Bitcoin
And
backed
it,
note would be the correct term. A Bitcoin backed note with a QR code on it or something like that. I don't know.
yeah, yeah, it's funny. I listened to a long talk by Eric Voskuil on that kind of theory of Bitcoin as a reserve currency and people issuing currencies with Bitcoin backing it, and how he explains called the reserve currency fallacy and explains exactly why it won't work. I'm not going to attempt to explain it right now, but it's really interesting to see how he's one of the only people who, well, he's not one of the only people, but he gives a very good argument, a logical argument as to why that won't happen because it won't work and it doesn't work and it'll end up leading to rehypothecation, which is exactly what happened with gold and it's exactly what happened with fiat.
Yeah, that's the issue.
And it so like when you centralize something, right, and one party controls it, then you can start to do things that other people don't know that you're doing, like inflate the currency. And that's happened throughout history every single time it's happened. And that's like a human fault. That's just something that they're going to do. If someone can increase the money supply over time, they're definitely going to increase the money supply.
Yeah, that's the biggest issue. Is you
So
can't trust anyone.
what did Satoshi? So you can't change. And now we have a money where we don't have to worry about that anymore. It's capped. Nobody's going to issue any more of it. And with the difficulty adjustment, the supply there can be no supply shock, right? So if hash power went up by 500% in the next week, that's not going to increase the amount of coins that are mined and put into the network, right? Because the difficulty adjustment will adjust up and make sure that we're having the same inflation schedule every 10 minutes, and it adjusts, which nothing else has that particular feature, right? So we already know what the inflation schedule is going to be, and it's set in stone. So when you listen to, I think, Milton Friedman talk about having a money that's run by a computer, this is one of those situations where money would definitely work better if it were completely out of particular, because there's always going to be that desire to fuck with the money supply and inflate it, and now we can't do that. So that's why Bitcoin exists. It's just crazy to think about.
Yeah, no, that Milton Friedman comment about like an e-cash. He said in the 90s there's that. It's a great video. You can look it up on YouTube. Just type in Milton Friedman e-cash, and he mentions it. Shit, I could just pull it up here. Um, and he mentions how it's such a big deal, and he talks about it because he saw computers as a rise to something new, and he's completely right. It's something different. It's really decentralizing is probably the correct term, but it's really just taking the need away from. You think about how much access government has, like how many federal employees there are, or whatever, or just waste basically is all it is. So, choice.
So that I think that the internet is going to be one of the major forces for reducing the role of government. The one thing that's missing, but that will soon be developed, is a reliable e-cash, a method whereby on the internet you can transfer funds from A to B without A knowing B or B knowing A. The way in which I can take a $20 bill and hand it over to you, and there's no record of where it came from. And you may get that without knowing who I am. That kind of thing will develop on the internet, and that will make it even easier for people to use the internet. Of course, it has its negative side. It means that the gangsters, the people who are engaged in illegal transactions will also have an easier way to carry on their business.
Yeah, so that's obviously a huge video, and that's the perfect 54-second video, and explains exactly how he predicted it right there on the dot. The eCash, and there were a few. I can't think of the names off the top of my head, but there were a few eCashes in the 90s, and they just didn't work because the cryptographic side wasn't there yet. But they did work theoretically.
Yeah, so I've done a little bit of research on some of the previous versions of digital cash, and the conclusion that I came to is a lot of them didn't work because they were centralized. Like that was the thing that they couldn't pull off because they didn't solve the Byzantine generals problem yet, and Satoshi did. But in order to do so, he had to combine multiple ideas from different versions of digital cash. So he took Adam Back's Hashcash protocol, right? The proof of work. He took that and combined it with, Nick Szabo's work of BitGold and, Wei Dai's implementation of B-Money, and put them all together and then solves the problem of, the difficult computer science problem, the Byzantine generals problem. And what do you know, presto, we have a working implementation of digital cash that's decentralized. And I think the decentralization was the key that they was the problem that they needed to solve. And then the second problem, arguably the most important part of Bitcoin, is the 21 million cap. Like that's why it's so cool, because the supply is fixed. It is digitally scarce. So now the only two things that are provably scarce in the world are time and Bitcoin, because I'm not going to live forever. My time on this planet is limited, and Bitcoin is limited to 21 million, period. Never going to change. And if it does change, then Bitcoin didn't work, and we're going to have to try something else.
Yeah,
but it's crazy that. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's something we have no clue how this is going to pan out. As we've said before, Bitcoin could fail, and I think it's such an interesting thing because Bitcoin's market cap is so small, so it's so hard to justify something that's 100 billion right now, somewhere around there, maybe less than that now. God, do I think
I don't know. I haven't.
I have to go. I haven't looked at CoinMarketCap and I haven't looked at CoinMarketCap in probably a year.
So no, that's a good point.
67
right?
billion.
So
it's tiny,
okay.
dude. It's tiny. So like, here's the issue. I try to stress this to the people who are super naive crypto is if the fiat monetary system collapses, Bitcoin can't go from 67 billion to like 30 trillion. That's just not going to happen. It's not how it's going to work. That's just not gonna happen. That doesn't happen overnight.
You're absolutely right that Bitcoin is just a drop in the bucket. It's got a small market cap when compared to every other asset class. And there's a chance that it's not going to work for sure. It is complete speculation on my part that Bitcoin will become global money. I do think it's the hardest money we've ever had, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be adopted as global money, no matter how sound it is. And that's like one of the biggest questions is how long does Bitcoin need to be around, and at what market cap does it need to get to for someone to say, yeah, like this is really obvious. Bitcoin's going to become global money, and it's going to take 50 years or whatever. Like how long does it need to survive? It's been 10 years. If it survives for 10 more years, is it more like it's more likely that it will stay around for 20 more years, right? But how many people will say like, oh, this thing's been around for 20 years. Maybe it's not going to die. Maybe it is going to keep accruing in value like it has for the past 20 years. I don't know. What do you think? When will people's minds get changed on that?
We've said before, dictators, authoritarian regimes come in hard economic times. Change comes in hard economic times, and that's exactly what will have to happen. Now, it's interesting to see if it'll work. As I said, it's just such a drop in the bucket that it would. I don't even know how to put it, but anyways, like what we were saying earlier with Bitcoin, someone sent $300 million in USD terms of Bitcoin for a fee of 4 cents, and that's incredible. You'd never get that if you wired $300 million. I couldn't even imagine the fee on it would be. I imagine $100,000. I don't know. It'd probably be pretty high. I imagine, if not more.
Well, it's funny because what we should really be comparing it to is how much would it cost to move $300 million in gold?
Oh yeah.
It would be a lot more expensive than a wire transfer because you need boats, you need fuel, you need humans to perform the resources and services to pick up the gold, count it, test it, make sure that it's legit, pack it onto a ship, and send it somewhere else. It would be crazy expensive to move $300 million worth of gold, and it only costs 4 cents to move the digital version. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, I was gonna say to counter that, just to mind fuck everyone who's listening. Here's a little food for thought. U.S. dollar, we don't know the real value. We know the nominal value, but we don't know the real value. Everything's priced in dollars. Bitcoin, oil, stocks, etc. You name it, real estate. That's where the issue comes. Do we know is the true value of gold really $1,300 or whatever? It's really close to 1,300 now, 1,290. Is it really 1,290? An ounce of gold? Do we know that? Is Bitcoin really worth $3,000 or whatever? No, 3,800, 3,900 right now. We don't know. And that's the issue with this nominal dollar illusion, and that's the whole. When we're talking about just a whole systemic collapse, this has been building for decades. This isn't something that happens overnight, and that's just obviously certain things can change fastly, but the whole thing, this build up takes years, and that's what we talk about. What they call it the everything bubble, because we look at what's going on right now when the system was supposed to collapse in 2008. They kicked the can down the road. Now you got student debt all-time high, auto loan debt all-time high, U.S. national debt's all-time high. China's national debt is at an all-time high. China's like 40 trillion in debt. I think China is a country that's going to get hit just as hard, if not harder, than the U.S. in this upcoming recession that we probably are in really technically right now, but no one's really said it yet. And I think we mentioned before. You asked me, "Do you think we're in a recession?" I said yes. I think it's happening. No one's talking about it, and when it does, the market, people are so attuned to the stock market nowadays. If we go to a sub $2,000 or sub 2,000 SPIX, S&P 500, people are going to panic. It's just that simple.
Yeah, it could get very ugly, especially you have an entire generation that is either already started retiring or will be retiring in the next couple of years. And those 401ks have been pumped to the moon because of cheap credit and inflating the money supply. It could get super ugly if the S&P takes another 50% haircut in the next I don't know, 24 to 36 months. I have no idea when this could play out if it does, but it's already down, or I don't know how much it's down. Is it already down 20% from all time high?
We were at one point, and
We
now
were
it's
at one
like
point.
16. I'll pull up a chart.
Yeah, I mean that's already some people who are heavily allocated to the S&P 500 lost 20% of their net worth in the last like
And
3 or 4
and
months.
some people are like, oh, 20%. But when you think about maybe a couple that, let's even just say a couple that is retiring, and say let's say this couple's done very well. They've accrued, they have 10 million in stocks because they've done very well, and they were at their peak earnings for their jobs in the 70s and let's say 80s and 90s, and you think about that boom there, and so they've grown their wealth. Well, 20% of 10, that's $2 million. That's a lot of money, obviously. And to that family, that's huge. That changes everything. That changes plans for everything. You know, that's $2 million they could have done something with disposable income wise. And that's that wealth effect they talk about with the economy, and what gets bad with that is people think they're wealthier than they really are, and then it gets vanished overnight. I mean, so think about that. Those people lose, $2 million overnight. Um, just recently I was talking with my grandpa, and he mentioned something about my aunt that she had over time accrued a good amount of money in the stock market, and lost a, a good chunk of portfolio in October, and she didn't know what to, know what to do. It's that wealth effect. It's that feeling of having money, but who knows how long it'll last. And I have a monthly chart here, and you can see the wealth effect here, but obviously stopped and kept going. And you can imagine the damage that'll be done if we close down anywhere. If we close down here, I mean that's wrecked. That's wrecked. And to recover from that, it's not easy. I mean
No,
this
the
is
recovery could take a really long time, and
yeah.
that's what
So
the global landscape and the narrative of everything that's going on in the world just makes me so excited to see
dude,
how this
could
plays
you
out.
imagine what
Because
this chart looks like if we, let's say by 2020, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Let's say by October 2020 we get to the lows of 2008. Do you imagine how sharp that chart will look?
yeah, I mean that
It could happen
would
sooner,
be
dude. It
outrageous.
really could happen sooner. Like by this time next year, January 1st, we could have shed all that value. I mean, look at that right there. And this is just on another level. It's the only difference.
Yep.
There you go. Look at this. Full fucking retrace, dude. Think about that. 1920s. You go from, 8 up to 30, so 300 plus percent gain, 330, whatever, and retrace all the way below where you started. We start here at 676. If we retrace to that, that's a mind-numbing. That's 80% off the S&P 500.
Yeah, that would suck for a lot of people. But it also is like it shouldn't come too much of a surprise now that we're talking about it. And everything that we talked about for the last 6 or 7 podcasts about globally what's going on, Bitcoin, people getting censored, malinvestment, cheap credit, housing bubbles, college loan bubbles. The narrative just really looks good. If we kept going up, I also wouldn't be surprised. Maybe the plunge protection team gets back in, the Fed decides to lower interest rates again, and the show goes on. But we're just delaying the inevitable
I,
again. So
I,
I don't think that's going to happen. I think rates
yeah,
will keep going up in 2019, and we're going to see what happens when the music stops and who has a chair. Like, I don't know. I'm going to sit down, you know? I'm sitting down already.
Yeah,
And I'm curious to see who else is going to sit down.
and the thing is it's gonna be fast. It's not gonna. I mean, this seems like we went up pretty quickly. Yeah, I mean it is a pretty. I mean, when you look at this and you zoom out, you're like, wow, that's a, you know, that trend's very strong. There's no way around it. Uh, it's pretty. I want to get a trend line going here. I usually have it up, but you know, long-term trend line, like, and I don't think that would hold. I doubt it would hold. Um, and I think there's already this major trend line here already broke. And I'm just doing this off quarterly candlesticks. Like, you know what? Maybe we just almost touched it, but uh, it doesn't look good, to say the least. And every which way you look at it, that's the top. You don't get that much of a every. You look at every stock chart, and I'll just go over to try to explain what I mean here. Is General Electric. I think CH and I have discussed this every time, and there's a reason. Look at that stock chart. It's dog shit. This is still, I think it's still investment grade. I can't. Do you know CH if they're still investment grade?
I have no idea. It wouldn't surprise me if they were,
I
but
think they were teetering on. They were teetering on it for a little bit.
yeah, I mean, here's the thing. GE's wrecked. Their pension liabilities are enormous, and
Yeah.
all the people that are retiring right now from GE are expecting to be paid every 2 weeks their pension until they die, and they're not going to be able to cover that. They're not even making the yield necessary to cover those liabilities, at least to the best of my understanding. I don't know. I haven't verified that, but I would find it very hard to believe that they would be able to cover those expenses.
I mean, when you're looking at it right now, it's the highest volume now is at $1.12, $1.10. So that's where the most shares have been traded here. That's likely where it's heading, and it's probably bankruptcy is where it's heading. It's not. I could, like, as we discussed earlier before we recorded, the dividend on this has gotten so. People might, oh, it's a dividend stock. It doesn't, price doesn't matter. Well, it's like, imagine buying in the 90s at $35 and just barely seeing that high twice and holding for a dividend now that is a penny.
One of the last pieces of the article talks about how more than 50% of the world's population lives under an authoritarian regime. And that's a lot of people. And it's easy for it's easy for me to make the argument why Bitcoin wouldn't be adopted in the United States to be used as money, because we don't really need it right now. Our money's working just fine. But for the 50% of the people on the planet who need sound money, who need Bitcoin, it's a lot of people. It's an astronomical amount of people.
Yeah, it's and I just scrolled up because as Nassim Nicholas Taleb, which I completely botched, Bitcoin is an insurance policy against an Orwellian future. And anyone who's read Orwell stuff or Huxley knows we are very much head down that path. We live in a time of Big Brother, the state. That's the most important thing. We literally worship the state. It's almost that bad at this point. And people don't even realize it. That's how good it's gotten. That's how rooted in, you could almost say, the Matrix. Red pill, blue pill, and that's how it is. And it's unfortunate, but that's where we're at today. And so what Huxley, Orwell said, the things that we hate will come to rule us. Huxley said the opposite. The things we love will come to rule us. And I think a perfect example is smartphones. None of us can get away from them. We have them on us all the time. They're passive listening. They have our location, everything. Everything we do is recorded. They're always with us, and And it's funny how they've become so vital in our lives. You don't have a smartphone, you have good luck with the workforce for the most part. In the modern day setting, unless you're doing, welding or I mean, but even most jobs, unless you don't need anything, you need a smartphone for most jobs, whether it's email, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want to be able to not carry around a smartphone if I don't have to, and that's really difficult because I love my phone and I use it all the time. But it makes perfect sense. I can be tracked, traced. My privacy's totally gone when I use my phone and use all of its functionality with location services and all that good stuff. It's it sucks. I wish I could not have a phone. I want
Yeah,
to be able to not have a phone. I really do, because
isn't that the conundrum?
that's the best way to do it. Like the best way to do it is to not have a phone, to not have a tracking device
Yeah,
and listening device on you at all
I
times. And how do you give that up? And it's so funny because Jameson Lopp was talking about this at the Baltic Honey Badger conference about like taking your privacy seriously and you know having residencies under LLCs and not in your name, and having a cheap like mobile home where you could stay totally off the grid. And that might sound insane, but when you can be persecuted for things that you've done in the past because your cell phone links you to a time and place where you did or said something, that's super scary.
yeah, I couldn't agree more with you on that. As you said, buying like a cheap mobile phone or something like that, it just keeps you off the grid basically. And it's you know we are seeing privacy just as we said earlier. It's just losing it left and right, and you know, obviously we see Bitcoin as one of the solutions to the privacy issue. Uncensorable money, and you know, as I've said before, I think this whole idea is we are on the cusp of something big. We are in the everything bubble, and I know I keep talking about it, but I'm just gonna pull this chart up here of Apple. This is the weekly candlesticks of Apple, and it's not pretty. Apple has shed roughly 40% of its value in a mere 8 weeks, maybe 12 tops, yeah, 12 weeks. Um, and yeah, it's scary because it just shows you how this is going to lead the market down with it. And what's scary about that is the reality is that systemic breakdown, and that's I know I keep mentioning it, but that's where we have to go after a decade of manipulation. It's and you'll see what I mean here. If I just zoom out to this, you'll this is a quarterly bar chart. I mean, there's nothing pretty about this. Um, and I mean, maybe next stop in here, but even then, Apple's broken a parabolic trend, and as our good friend Peter LeBrant, if I even said that right, says on Twitter, 80% minimum decline. We saw that in Bitcoin. Bitcoin declined from 20K to 3K basically. Um, and where that puts us, that puts it at 45, $46. That puts it down here. Um, that means pensions, endowments, mutual funds, ETFs are wrecked. And on top of that, indices, because Apple is such a heavyweight in the indices. And it's also shed, nearly $400 billion in value, which is absolutely insane. And I think this week they shed 75 billion in one day when they dropped 10%.
Yeah, that's more than the entire market cap of Bitcoin. That's crazy.
Exactly. So Apple shed more in a day than the entire market cap of Bitcoin. That's what I try to tell people. I love Bitcoin for what it is, but we are such a drop in the bucket, man. A daily swing of Apple was more than Bitcoin. Um, and now you think about the whole market itself moving around. And so that's where it's at. And it'll be interesting to see this year play out. I'm really looking forward to 2019 personally. It's going to be a very interesting year. Obviously, I don't doubt we're in a bear market. I 100% think we're in a bear market, and there's no way around it. Um, and when we're talking about macro sense, the Dow Jones Industrial Average just looks as bad. We're having another dead cat bounce here. Um, we look at gold, though. Gold's made a big rally since its low around 1160 this summer, and I wouldn't be surprised to see gold break out to new highs here, or local highs in terms of the last few years. It's all-time high around 2000 here, 1900. So, I wouldn't be surprised to see this start breaking out. Same with silver, because, the whole thing we've talked about in previous episodes, stock to flow ratio. These have high stock to flow ratio, meaning that there is a higher supply of stock, aka the currency or the silver or gold on the earth, whether in the form of a currency, jewelry, etc., bullion, than there is getting mined out, being added to supply, and that's why fiat currencies fails because they have a lower stock to flow ratio. The government is manipulating the supply, and in the case of the U.S., we have no clue how bad the inflation really is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the stock to flow ratio, when you start studying monetary history, you realize that the money with the highest stock to flow ratio, right?
Yes, which is Bitcoin right now.
Right. So the money with the highest stock to flow ratio historically has been the dominant money every time. And now you have something that's provably the hardest money with the highest stock to flow ratio. And I think after the next halving or soon thereafter, Bitcoin's inflation rate will be closer to 1.7 or 1.3% annually. So then it'll be lower than gold, and people are speculating if that's going to be a talking point when the time comes that now Bitcoin has a lower inflation rate than gold, and does that make it that much harder of a money to everybody else?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's going to be, as we said before, we have no clue where this is going and how this will play out. Whether is it going to be a gold standard next? Dollar hegemony is 100% out the door, and you're definitely seeing it with Trump's policies are definitely more nationalistic than previous presidencies. And we're seeing in general a broad movement globally for nationalism. We see in Brazil, we're seeing it now in Europe with the riots going on, and the demonstrations. So a lot of things are happening at once, and that's why I just tell people stay on your feet and stay up to date on the stuff, because before you know it, there's going to be a new reserve currency for the world. Assuming we avoid worst case scenario of systemic collapse completely to the point where there's nothing, no value in any currency, which would be a terrible scenario. I don't think that'll happen. I think we're gotten past that point, but it's really what's next. Is it gold? Is it Bitcoin? Is it Dogecoin? Who knows?
Yeah, gold has quite a head start, 5,000 years on
Yeah.
Bitcoin. So the only
That's
thing I'll say to that is gold already lost, like fiat beat it. So you're still going to run into the same scaling issues that you do with gold, right? You need coinage or fiat on top of gold to scale. Nobody's going to be carrying around gold to transact with it. It's just not going to happen. And you have that centralization issue to make that work. And you don't have that with Bitcoin. So that's the only reason why I wouldn't think gold we would go back to a gold standard, just because it already lost. So I can't, and Bitcoin is 10 times better than gold. So I would assume it would be Bitcoin or something else that either exists already or doesn't exist. We're going to have to wait and see. But I'm excited to see what it is.
Yeah, it's what I wonder to counter your argument there on, uh, gold losing to fiat money is theoretically, yes, it did lose. It lost, because we, most nations, people, we exchange things in fiat currency. But when you think about in the grand scheme of things, the long term, has gold really lost? I don't think so. And what I think is even worse is gold has now been centered in the hands of central banks and very powerful associations, or governments themselves. So now the hardest currency out there, at least over historically, it's 5,000 years. You can't beat that track record. The hardest money out there is now hoarded by central banks and governments. And so with the inevitable collapse of the fiat currency system, they'll be the ones holding the bag. And, everyone else does not have it. And that's my counter to your statement earlier about that. It's something that's really been on my mind lately as 2019 plays out and as this recession gets worse, what is going to happen with the dollar?
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with the dollar because I guess the dollar would be the strongest of the fiat currencies. And I go back and forth with if we're going to see hyperinflation in the U.S. I'm not 100% sure if that's going to happen. I think if other currencies start to hyperinflate, they're going to be the weakest ones that exist and not the U.S. dollar. And there's also the argument that the transition to a new monetary standard, assuming it's Bitcoin, doesn't have to be as violent as people make it out to be. I know I'm bearish macro of just everything, but it could end up being not as scary as it seems. But I don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I'm excited. That's all I have to say. I am excited for 2019.
Me too. 2019, it's going to be great. Just started January 5th. I'm excited, man. There's a lot to look forward to this year. And we're going to keep pumping out podcasts as often as possible.
Yeah, as much as possible. We're going to pump those numbers up.
All right, well,
that note, we should wrap it up.
Yeah, let's wrap it up. This has been another long one. If you're still here, thank you very much. We appreciate it, and we'll try to keep bringing you guys good content as best we can, man. All right, have a good one.
Adios.